What's the craziest plot twist you've experienced in your life? A friend of a friend went to a college party expecting a normal night of fun with her friends. She met a guy she found attractive. They exchanged numbers and found a quiet corner to make out for a bit. Typical party stuff. The guy asked if she wanted to go home with him, but she decided to leave with her friends instead. The next morning, she noticed some red bumps around her mouth and assumed, "Oh no, I got herpes. Sucks to be me." Naturally, she went to the student health center to get checked. The doctor ran some tests and said he would call her in a few hours. Later, while sitting in class, she received the call, "You need to get back to my office now." She went, and the doctor explained that the bumps were only contracted through contact with someone who had been eating human flesh. Everything flipped. The police were contacted, and the number she had for the guy led them to his apartment, where they found two women, already cold, that he had apparently been having for God knows how long. Story 2. My boyfriend used to have a rundown Mustang and would joke with his friends that he liked his women like he liked his cars. Can't run. After dating for a year and a half, we got in a car crash that left me paralyzed from the waist down. Edit. This is funny, guys. Don't feel bad for laughing. Double edit. Yes, we are still together. The crash was not in the Mustang, but in a Ford Ranger. My boyfriend was not injured in the accident. The banging is good. Story 3. I started dating a girl. Her single mom met my single dad. They mingled. Hard. Then the girl slept with my best friend. Messy breakup. Now my ex-girlfriend is my stepsister. Life is a sick joke. Edit. I forgot the icing on the cake. They got married on the night of my senior ball. Edit 2. No, we did not hook up afterward, you sick jerks. Lol. But thanks for all the support, guys. It was a hard thing to go through for sure, but threads like this make it all okay. You're the real MVPs. Story 4. Just last week, I was on my way to a job interview in London, and as always, running a little late. It was tight to make it to the train station, so I started jogging a bit. Unfortunately, I had diarrhea at the time, and the movement caused me to soil myself. By this point, I was panicking because if I missed the train, I would be half an hour late for the interview. I looked around and saw Moss Bros, so I dove inside, ran up to the till, and out of breath, panted, "34 waist, medium length, quickly." The girl stuffed it in a bag, and I left the money without waiting for the change. I ran as fast as I could and just made it onto the train before the doors closed. It was pretty full, so I hobbled up the aisles, through a few carriages to the toilet to change my trousers and clean up. I took off my trousers and pants, rolled them up, and poked them out the little toilet window. I cleaned myself up, then opened the bag, only to find it was a jacket. Story 5. I met a guy in the lobby of the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. We were hitting it off really well. We both loved physics, wanted to become physicists, and were big Doctor Who fans. The only problem was he was 22 and I was 20. We told each other our names. His was Jeffrey, mine was Lucy, and exchanged phone numbers. A couple of days later, we went to dinner as a date. He told me he had been adopted at only a couple of weeks old. My mother had told me that my brother, 2 years older than me, Jeffrey, died 2 weeks after birth. So I mentioned my older brother dying at around the same age and gave him his name. He got worried and started sweating. We went back to my house, we did not do it, to call my parents, who suggested a blood test. The very next day, we went to the doctor, and it turned out I had dated my brother. Story 6. I met a girl through POF and dated her for a year. She lived 6 minutes up the street from me, so we saw each other quite often. Both of us were fairly introverted, so we mainly hung out just with each other. We both considered the relationship serious and exclusive. Right from the start, I noticed she would text one guy quite frequently. I asked her about him, and she told me he was her tattoo artist. Just to be snoopy, I checked the website of the tattoo shop she went to. Sure enough, there was a tattoo artist there with the same first name as the guy in her phone, but the last name was different. I asked her about it, and she quickly called me paranoid, saying it was ridiculous to think she would lie to me. I agreed. It was pretty paranoid of me. Maybe 5 months into the relationship, I was on Facebook and decided to search the name of the guy in her phone. A profile came up in the same small city we both lived in, but there was no profile picture or any other information. I decided to bring it up with her again, because now there were 2 Facebook profiles, one for the actual tattoo artist and one with the same name as in her phone. She freaked out at me for bringing it up again and told me I was crazy. I agreed, but just wanted a straight answer. She told me I had nothing to worry about. I apologized, and we got over it. About a year into the relationship, I found her on POF. I would periodically check to see if she had recreated her profile since we had both deleted our accounts. I found a profile that I thought might be hers, though it had no pictures. I catfished it, and it turned out to be her. She was back on POF and looking for guys. I had all the evidence I needed and was planning to confront her the next day and break up with her. However, I decided that before I did, I would message the Facebook profile I had found that matched the name in her phone, just out of curiosity. Plot twist. I messaged the guy, and he got back to me immediately. We started talking, and it turned out he was her boyfriend. I had been her second boyfriend the entire time. She had met him 2 months before meeting me. She bounced back and forth between us for an entire year, with neither of us knowing about the other. He had once seen my name in her phone, and she told him I was her tattoo artist. Every time I ever called her out, I was right. Every time she mysteriously disappeared at night, she was with him. Every time she said she was hanging out with a friend, she was with him. She didn't actually have any friends. It was always him. Anyway, we both broke up with her the next morning and met the following day for a beer. I haven't spoken with him since. Story 7. I used to know a guy named Ben. He was the biggest two-faced jerk I'd ever known. He once met a girl online, went out to meet her, and returned a few days later. When talking to his female friends, he said there was no spark, no chemistry, whatever. To his guy friends, he said she was so ugly he couldn't stand to look at her. Ben hated ugly women. Ben and I lived together briefly, and my overweight girlfriend, later my wife and now ex-wife, stayed with us frequently. She was friendly with him, would hang out with him while I was at work, and often drove him around if he needed. But as soon as she was gone, he would laugh about how fat she was. Ben hated fat women. Years and years passed. One day, I was on OkCupid and noticed a new member who looked vaguely familiar. I looked at her photos and it hit me. Ben, who had already been unattractive, had gained a lot of weight and transitioned. In essence, he had become a fat, unattractive woman, the very thing he hated most. The end. Or is it? Transgender Ben briefly dated a lesbian friend of mine who lived with my ex-wife. He would come hang out, not realizing he was in the house of the woman he had made fun of for being overweight just a few years earlier. His relationship with the lesbian didn't last, needless to say. Story 8. My law school was one big plot twist. First, above the auditorium was a sign that read, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Good start. That anecdote in the paper chase about people cutting cases out of books so others couldn't complete legal writing and research assignments? Literally true at my law school. I went there in the dinosaur era when, even though we had electronic research, we still had to learn the old-fashioned way. Oh, and my criminal law professor was so old, he had actually helped author the original model penal code in the 1940s. He genuinely believed marital essay was not a crime. The bizarre stories didn't stop there. One of my classmates, slightly after law school, perpetrated what was at the time one of the largest art frauds ever committed on eBay, an emerging technology at the time. A guy in the year below me was an MD switching careers. He put himself through law school by picking up shifts in the many emergency departments in town. He was something of a phenom, well known around the Ohe school. This was the mid-90s, so cell phones were very rare. My first was an absolute brick, and my first plan had a whopping 10 minutes a month, strictly for emergencies. One day, Dr. Lawyer S. Kearns was kayaking in the bay when someone attempted to jump from a bridge. He paddled over, rendered emergency aid, and used his uncommon cell phone to call for help. He saved the man's life and, in the process, landed a cell phone advertising job. He went on to appear in ads promoting his phone and the network that helped him save a life. Plot twist. He was arrested a few years later and convicted of murder for throwing his infant child out the window of a high-rise building. Later on, when I was a second year, a third year, offed himself. Sadly, not unheard of. His legal given name was Phoenix. We called the school the Island of the Broken Toys. It was one of the best law schools in the country, but astonishingly dysfunctional. Story 9. I walked into a new job on my first day, walked up to a guy, and introduced myself. He said, "No time to waste," and handed me a few odd tasks, so I got started. I'd been working for about an hour when my phone rang, and it was the job I had just started. I answered, and the guy on the line said, "You are aware today is your first day?" I said, "Yes, I'm actually here. David gave me some things to do." He replied, "Who's David?" Apparently a complete stranger had just started assigning me work, and I didn't question it for a second. We had a good laugh about it. Story 10. I have one story that's straight out of a soap opera, and I'm fully ready for people to call BS, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I was very good friends with a guy in high school named John, who was dating a lovely guy named Janny. Polish, I think, but that's not really relevant. John was madly in love with him. He carried Janny's picture in his wallet, and whenever they were together, they were incredibly sweet. Truly an adorable couple. Then, one day, Janny started acting distant and strange. He didn't answer John's calls and stopped spending time with us. Eventually, he flat out broke up with John, shattering the poor guy's heart. I even brought a spare t-shirt for a few days because my shoulder would be soaked from John crying on it. And then it got even worse. One afternoon after school, John called me, begging me to come over because he needed a friend. When I arrived, he told me that Janny had been killed in a car accident, and he was absolutely devastated all over again. I went with him to the funeral a few days later for moral support, and he was completely broken. He spent the next couple of weeks just moping and being utterly depressed. And then the plot twist. Are you ready for this? Then he got a call from Janny. It turns out Janny had a twin brother we had never known about, who was apparently a big troublemaker and had been sent off to boarding school. When he'd been home visiting last, they had swapped places for reasons I never found out, maybe just for a laugh or something else. Either way, they did. It was the twin who had been avoiding John and broke up with him, and he had been drinking and doing drugs before getting into the accident that killed him. Janny had been at boarding school and couldn't make it back for the funeral. When he finally returned home, he had to work up the nerve for a few days to tell his parents what had happened. That's when the family realized that the child they thought was dead was actually alive, and the one they thought was alive was dead. This led to a cascade of family chaos. Obituary retractions, headstone replacements, and lots of screaming apparently. Meanwhile, John and Janny had a whirlwind romance, swept up in the giddy bliss of being reunited. But it fizzled out after about a month. John was furious once reality sank in, angry at what Johnny had done without telling him, for letting him be miserable all that time, and for making him think Johnny had died. I was just a third-party observer in all of this, but to this day, it's probably the most unbelievable thing that's ever happened in my life. Story 11. The past year has been one consistent plot twist. I entered my first year of college wanting to connect more with my grandmother after my grandfather passed away when, bam, she passed away from kidney failure. I tried to cope and take my mind off things by walking my dog more when, bam, my dog passed away from leg carcinoma. I focused on my work and did well on my midterms in March when, bam, my dad passed away from surgery complications. I told myself to stay strong and continue into my second year of college. My dad's lifelong best friend promised to teach me how to grill the way my father used to when, bam, he died from a heart attack. Story 12. To clear up the confusion, Kay is my female, bi friend. Jen was her bi girlfriend. Andre is Kay's boyfriend. Brian is Jen's boyfriend. Kay started dating a woman named Jen, who turned out to be pretty strange, clingy, demanding, constantly accusing Kay of being shady, and even accusing her of being in a relationship with me, also female. One day, I asked Kay, "So tell me how you met Jen." Kay and Jen had met on a study abroad trip. Jen was romantically interested in Kay, but Kay didn't really feel the same. Jen was completely fine with that, and they became good friends. During the trip, Jen even introduced Kay over email to her cousin Andre. Andre and Kay hit it off and began an online relationship, exchanging pictures and everything. When Kay returned home, Andre sent her gifts, including expensive jewelry. Andre also introduced Jen to his friend Brian, and the two of them hit it off as well. Everyone was happy. Until one day, Jen heard from a mutual friend that Andre and Brian were dead. They had run off together in a gay love affair and overdosed on drugs, just weeks before Andre was supposed to meet Kay in person for the first time. In their shared grief, Kay and Jen started a relationship together. Wow, quite the frigging story. In fact, I decided it sounded completely insane and started digging. I found the picture of Andre that he had sent her in a random Google search. I looked for any news about this torrid gay love affair that supposedly ended in a hotel drug binge. Nothing. Just all kinds of bizarre inconsistencies. So I asked Kay, "Have you ever thought that maybe Andre doesn't exist?" She was surprisingly open to the idea and not upset. We went to Andre's old email account and managed to get in using Jen's password. Yes, they shared passwords because Jen didn't trust Kay. Kay completely lost it. Jen had created Andre and the entire story, complete with fake photos, paying a male cousin to have phone conversations with Kay, getting explicit pictures, and everything else. During the time Kay was with Andre, her mother died unexpectedly, and Andre had even paid for all of Kay's travel expenses for the services. And it was Jen the whole time. This went on for well over a year. Kay emailed Jen from the grave using dead Andre's account and pushed her into confessing. Jen then threatened to kill herself. So Kay called the police, who took her to the hospital. After that, Kay got a restraining order, and they never saw each other again. Bonus detail. Jen even had someone possibly Jen herself, call Kay pretending to be Andre's aunt to say how sorry she was that he had died and how much he had loved her. There was also the claim that during this supposed drug binge, Andre and Brian cut each other's testicles with plastic forks. Hell of a drug. Kay is married now to a real person. I've met him, and she has a daughter. This whole incident was several years ago. Story 13. My mom and I haven't really had a relationship for the past 5 years for a lot of reasons. A couple of the biggest were that I had left the religion I was raised in, and she had severe bipolar disorder that made her nearly impossible to deal with, and she refused to maintain treatment. We had only spoken once in the last 5 years about a year and a half ago. I drove down to California to visit her, 450 miles from me, and tried to patch things up. It ended in a huge blowout fight and went as poorly as possible. We never spoke again. One morning in May of this year, my dad showed up at my door randomly. He and my mom had been divorced for many years and said we needed to talk. The apartment building my mom was living in had been set on fire, and she didn't make it out. I still can't believe how hard it hit me. It changed me, maybe forever. The worst part came about 3 weeks ago when I was trying to remember the password to an old PayPal account. I had to have it reset, and the reset was sent to an old email address I hadn't used in years. When I logged in, I found an email from her sent just shortly before she died, apologizing and trying to reconnect and make amends. We had been out of contact for so long that it was the last email address she had for me, but since I hadn't been using it for years, I didn't see her message until months after her death. Story 14. My younger brother split his time between my dad's and my mom's house, while my older brother and I lived with my mom full-time. He often told me strange stories about noises at my dad's house and my dad acting oddly. For example, he'd hear a loud thud from upstairs, and my dad would clear his throat or turn up the TV. I thought it was weird, but figured my brother was being paranoid. My dad was a really big guy. He would eat dinner, then save himself meals to take upstairs to his man cave, where he sometimes slept. He was selfish and clearly needed some type of personal getaway. All of that went on for months, maybe even years. My brother started to suspect someone was actually living up there. He even said it sounded like the bed was rocking and heard moans when our dad was supposedly alone. I started to worry for my brother's safety, but also his sanity. What a bizarre thing to think, right? I guess my dad's wife and my little brother never went up there because it was considered my dad's space. My brothers and I went to my dad's place for Father's Day, just hanging out, chatting, when suddenly his wife screamed from upstairs. Turns out my dad really did have someone living up there. She'd gone up for the first time in forever and found her. And the best part? My dad lied straight to his wife's face, claiming the girl had been kicked out and just needed somewhere to stay. She also happened to be someone he dated before marrying his current wife. Moo. Also, what the actual F? Story 15. I was making a late-night munchie run to the nearest convenience store. Just as I got to the door, I saw a group of people turning the corner and heading my way. Being my usual overcompensating self while high, I stepped aside and held the door open for them from about 5 feet away. The group was 2 guys and a girl. Right before they entered, one of the guys said he was going to have a smoke outside and wait for them. The whole interaction lasted maybe 10 seconds. Soon enough, I was inside, buying chips, soda, and whatever else my stoned brain craved. While I was trying to decide between Skittles and Smarties, I could hear the girl giggling while making a coffee. A quick glance confirmed the guy she came in with had his hands on her. Not overtly inappropriate, just around her hips and standing very close. They exchanged a few kisses like any PDA couple would. Meanwhile, I was in line with my king's ransom of snacks. They lined up right behind me, and I could hear the guy going on about the girl, how beautiful she was, how he couldn't wait to get her home, and so on. I got my snacks bagged and paid for, then left the store, passing guy number 3 on the way out. I returned to my car just in time to see the guy and girl leave the store, but guy 3 was still around the corner, ashing his cigarette. They looked for about 2 seconds, gave up on hiding, and continued making out a few feet from the door. Then guy 3 turned the corner and saw them. He started screaming, "What the heck is this? You're kissing him, you bish! Screw you, dude!" Apparently she was guy 3's girlfriend, but had gotten way too comfortable with guy 1. I left before things escalated further. I wasn't sticking around to witness whatever mess was going to go down there. Story 16. I was engaged to be married when I was only 20. I broke things off at 22, met my now husband, and within 3 months we were pregnant and married. Fast forward 13 years. My husband works in construction, and we became very good friends with his foreman and his wife. Our kids are the same age, we share some interests, and things are generally good, Except the wife is more than a little unhinged. She's high-strung, with strange self-esteem issues despite being very pretty. She becomes fascinated by everything I do. She constantly asks questions about my thoughts on parenting, makeup, movies, housewifery, intimacy, everything. Then she starts copying us. I tell her about a fight my husband and I had, and she and Dee suddenly have the same kind of fight right in front of us. My sons are long-haired little skater kids, so her son grows his hair out. I go to see The Lord of the Rings, and suddenly they are really into it. She reads the books I love, tattoos things I admire onto her skin, starts mimicking my mannerisms, and even flirts a little too much with my husband. And it starts to bother me. I tried to bring it up politely, but she blew up. We didn't talk for months. One day, my husband came home from work and said he'd heard that our friend's marriage was falling apart. I was curious, so I sent her a supportive email, thinly disguising my curiosity. She called the next day. We talked, and after a while, she admitted to infidelity, then started apologizing to me for betraying our friendship by sleeping with the man I loved. I hung up in fury, drove straight to my husband's work, and confronted him. He was stunned. Then he got angry and tried to deny it. Together we crossed the job site and confronted the poor husband of this woman. The man was horrified that his wife had told me what happened. I screamed at my husband and ran off in hysterics. The foreman stopped me because he didn't understand why I was angry at my husband. After all, my husband hadn't introduced his wife to my old fiancé. Yep, she had become so obsessed with me that she tracked down my ex-fiancé and seduced him, and she thought I would give a single F about it. Now I hear she's all cracked out, living in the high desert with another guy I also went to high school with. Weirdo. Story 17. This happened to a friend of mine. She had been feeling lonely for months and met a guy she really connected with while gaming. Sadly, they lived too far apart to meet in person. Over the following months, they grew closer and eventually he asked her out. They started e-dating. She confided in me that she really, really liked him and was saving money to go visit. Fast forward 14 months. She had saved the money, booked the flight, and was about to meet the man she loved. Everything was perfect. She was flying out the very next day. Cue me getting a hysterical call late at night. It was hard to decipher what she was saying, but I got her to slow down. "He's not him," she kept repeating. I asked for clarification. "He's not him," she cried. I was still confused. "I don't get it. What does that mean? He lied about what he does or his age or something?" "No," she replied. "He lied about who he is, what he is. He is not him. He is she. He is not Michael. She is Michelle." It turned out the guy was actually a lonely lesbian who, if dressed and made up for webcam, looked a bit butch. She had been using pictures of her brother the entire time for everything else. Sadly, my friend almost had a nervous breakdown and ended up with serious trust issues and a medium-sized case of homophobia. Story 18. When my grandmother died, we all found out that when she was 13 in Argentina, her older brother, whom none of us knew existed, became psychotic and was hospitalized in a mental institution. Remember, this was 1930s Argentina. Over time, my grandmother lost touch with her brother. What with moving overseas and everything else, she always carried the secret shame that she had abandoned her brother. Her brother apparently later died while still hospitalized, alone. Fast forward 70 years. Grandma dies and my father travels to Argentina. We now live in Israel to meet family and pay respects at his uncle's grave. He goes from cemetery to cemetery searching for the grave but can't find it. Maybe he was cremated? So he starts visiting mental hospitals, though we don't know where his uncle had been admitted, searching through records. Soon enough, he picks up a 70-year-old trail and follows his uncle from hospital to hospital, some of which had closed decades earlier. Finally, in modern times, plot twist, he finds his uncle alive and well, 96 years old, in a Buenos Aires mental hospital. Anyway, long story short, my dad took him out of the hospital, placed him in a supported living environment, and got him off 90% of the medications they had him on. Thus emerged a relatively stable, but still schizophrenic, old man. Epilogue. Recently, he called my aunt and said, "Susan, did you know that America has a black president?" Story 19. Not a huge plot twist, but I found this story about a friend rather amusing. My friend, who lives on campus near me, had 5 other roommates, each with their own rooms. One of the roommates was a Chinese guy who, for a while, had been acting strangely. He alternated between being really friendly and being cold and unsure. He'd never open his door completely when people knocked, and he would sometimes forget things he had said when referenced later. His English skills would fluctuate wildly, and he would sometimes change his clothes oddly halfway through the day. He usually spent almost all his time inside his room and would make himself a rather large number of meals throughout the day. After 6 months of this strange behavior, which my friend mostly didn't think was worth asking about, one day she came back from class. She opened the door next to the kitchen and looked to the side, into the kitchen. There were 2 of the odd-acting roommates staring back at her, deer in the headlights style. It turned out he had been hiding his twin brother in his room since he'd arrived. They were worried the other roommates would report him to the university if they found out. So they took turns leaving the room, checked if the coast was clear before both came out, and alternated cooking meals, one at a time, and so on. Story 20. A friend once had a girlfriend, and their relationship was pretty brutal. After a while, she moved back to her hometown 2 hours north of Stockholm. At first, it seemed like they were finally going their separate ways, but then she dropped the pregnancy bomb on him. Out of guilt, duty, or love, I'm not sure which, he decided to try to make it work, moving to her town to start a life together. The plot twist was that she wasn't actually pregnant. That might not have been so bad, except she had encouraged him not to use protection, which ended up resulting in a real pregnancy. As if that wasn't enough, a few months in, she revealed that she was a lesbian and had a girlfriend on the side. It really sounds like something out of one of those terrible TV shows. Needless to say, my friend was in shambles when he returned to Stockholm to start over. Story 21. This is probably all due to how incredibly oblivious I was at the time. I was 20 years old and frequented a graphic design forum. This was the early 2000s when forums were still the most common form of online community, the kind where you actually felt like you knew the people behind the usernames. At some point, I mentioned that the Congress I was attending in a major city had a huge 6-hour gap between events, and I was bored. Another user immediately replied that they had the same problem at the same Congress. We ended up agreeing to meet in town and visit some of the museums to pass the time. It turns out she was a nice-looking Asian woman around my age, or so I thought. We spent the day hanging out, making small talk, and exploring the city, then returned to work at the end of each day. The Congress lasted several days, so we ended up doing the same thing multiple times, visiting museums, small galleries, and exhibitions. I like art, but given my line of work, it mostly felt like research. On the last day, she mentioned something in passing that completely stumped me. When I divorced 20 years ago, apparently she wasn't my age at all, but 17 years older. We had a good laugh about it, and I quietly laughed to myself too, since the thought of asking her out had crossed my mind before. With dating off the table, I didn't think much of it when she needed to pick up some things from her hotel room. We went in, and in the space of 30 minutes, I got my first proper kiss, my first blowy, heard the sentence, "I want you inside of me," which I had no idea people actually said, and lost my virginity. I was so unprepared that I even asked her what she was doing while she had her tongue in my mouth. I remember lying there afterwards, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the last 30 minutes while thinking, what the hell just happened? Story 22. This happened to my dad, not me. My dad met this woman, let's call her Jessica. She had just been kicked out of her elderly mother's home by her sister, even though she had been caring for her mother and regularly visiting her father in a nursing facility for people with Alzheimer's. My dad offered her a place to stay for a little while until she could get back on her feet. She was incredibly sweet and caring, with what seemed like a heart of gold, and had been unfairly ostracized by her family. They started to hit it off and began dating. We all met her, and the whole family liked her immediately. She told us about her son, who lived in Virginia, let's call him John. He was a mechanical engineer who had graduated from Clemson University a few years earlier and taken a job up there. We're in South Carolina. She also told us she had left an abusive husband and moved in with her parents to raise her son. Everything seemed to be going well, and about 3 months later, my dad told us he had asked her to marry him. We were shocked, but we went with it. If that wasn't strange enough, they wanted to get married as soon as possible. Again, it was odd, but we went with it. So, they were married in under 2 months from that point. Suddenly, she told my dad about all this money, millions supposedly, that she had made from poker machines before they were outlawed here. She explained how she and a friend had gone into business together. It didn't sound too strange because she had previously owned a temp service with that same friend, and her father was in one of the most prestigious and expensive care facilities in the area. So the story seemed to line up. She even took us to the house she had sold to a local church and pointed out all the changes they had made. She started making plans to buy a convenience store, talked to the owner who was selling it, and began working out the details. She even made plans for her friend to attend a cooking class with my sister and aunt, though she ended up canceling at the last minute through Jessica. Here's where the plot twist starts. All of a sudden, She called the whole deal off. She claimed the IRS had frozen her accounts because her friend and business partner was being investigated for tax evasion. She said she was so scared she couldn't even buy a pack of gum. She hired a lawyer to handle the IRS issue and another to deal with her sister, who coincidentally decided to sue her around the same time. My uncle, a service writer at a local Buick dealer who is well known and liked by local patrons, mentioned to us around Christmas that one of these patrons, who knew my dad, my uncle, and Jessica, had said she wasn't who she seemed. By then, we were already noticing the obvious inconsistencies, but this was just the icing on the cake. My dad decided to do some digging and uncovered inaccuracies in her background. He tracked down her sister, let's call her Claire, and talked to her. It turned out that Jessica's stories about caring for her parents were actually her sister's experiences. Her son had lived in the next city the whole time and wanted nothing to do with her. She often visited a friend who had had a motorcycle accident, which was actually her ex-husband. She didn't have just one child. She had 5, 4 of whom she had literally sold, raising them to about 18 months before finding a buyer to adopt them. She had been married 3 times previously, not just the once she had told my dad. There was no money, no businesses, and none of the friends she constantly mentioned. Nothing at all was real. Even the house she had sold belonged to her ex-brother-in-law. Her entire life was made up of cherry-picked stories from her family's lives. Claire told my dad he was the fastest to figure it out. Jessica was also being sued by her sister and mother to remove her as executor of her father's estate because she was deemed mentally incapable of handling it. Now my dad is seeking an annulment of the marriage. My sister tracked down 2 of her children and talked to them about the whole situation. It's been a whirlwind of disbelief with new information emerging every day. I'm sure I've left out plenty of craziness, but I think I've covered the main points. Story 23. This happened 10 years ago when I was 16. Living in a small village in France, I met a girl a few years older than me named Charlotta. I'd moved there recently and we quickly became very good friends. Since we were both female, we tried each other's clothes on and talked for hours on end. She lived in an immaculate manor house in the hills, and for weeks I would practically live there, as her parents were almost never around. It was our own little world. My family was quite poor, so all of this was very new to me. Charlotta and I lounged around the house, drank ridiculous amounts of red wine, and listened to opera, which she was really into. Fast forward a couple of months and Charlotta and I were in love. We were inseparable, and our parents couldn't have torn us apart if they had tried. One day, while wandering around her expansive house, I came across a door I had never really noticed. After asking Charlotta about it, she told me the story of her sister, who had tragically drowned in a river. The room had become a shrine and hadn't been touched since she died 5 years ago. Charlotta had simply forgotten to mention it to me. After that, Charlotta often brought up her sister, Mina. Nothing strange, just little comments here and there. If I tried on a dress, she would say it had belonged to her sister, or she would pull out a picture and tell me something about her. For a while, Mina was simply a common talking point. Fast forward another couple of months. I was making my way up to Charlotta's house to see her. I walked through the front door, which was never locked, and found her sitting on her bed packing. She said she was moving to America to study. I was completely shocked. I just stood there silently crying, unable to process that my best friend was leaving. I couldn't take it, so I turned around and walked out. As I headed down her driveway, a voice called out to me. To my left was a woman in her 30s, asking if I was all right because I had tears on my face. When I looked at her, something about her seemed familiar. Slowly, I realized it was Mina, Charlotta's supposedly dead sister, standing right in front of me. I turned away and left, stunned. It turned out Mina had never died. She never drowned in the river. She had been living in England with her husband the whole time. Charlotta had made it all up. It was her sick little game. I never saw Charlotta again, and I never went back to the house. Story 24. I was job searching in my early 20s. I went to a job interview, and the guy didn't know I was coming. He grudgingly walked me into his office and started asking questions. I had been on so many interviews that I just wasn't in the mood for someone making me feel unwelcome. He asked why I wanted to work there, and part of my answer was, I like to help people. He responded with, BS. I was surprised, but I could tell this was going nowhere. The rest of the interview was just a formality, and I ended with a sarcastic, sorry to bother you. I got back to my apartment feeling down, then received a voicemail asking where I had been for my interview. They said if I was still interested, I should call back. I compared the name, number, and company with the business card I was given, and it turned out I had been on the wrong floor. I had just walked into a random company and gotten an interview. But yeah, I didn't get either job. Story 25. Bill was a self-made millionaire by the time he was 18. That was in the mid-80s. He has been one of my best and most influential friends. 25 years ago, he married a girl I did not like or trust. I told him as much, but he married her weird ass anyway. A few years ago, she ran off with a guy she met at a roller skating rink. He apparently wooed her with his Zooming or whatever, and Bill was single again. He met a new girl and insisted I meet her. Bill remembered that I had not approved of his ex. We met for lunch at one of those awful buffets. This girl was beautiful. She used English like a scalpel, was working on her PhD, and was just awesome. But I noticed little things about her. She had obviously been to finishing school, yet she had fingernail polish on her cuticles and a dress from a 1985 resale rack. There were just a lot of details that didn't add up, and Bill was getting ready to marry her. I told him I thought she was hiding something, but I didn't care. This gal was high class and high bred. I told him she was great. Bill hadn't met her parents until the wedding, which was at their beach house in Destin. It turns out my friend hadn't told his new bride about his formidable wealth, but she had been hiding the fact that her parents are legit billionaires. Bill deserves someone like her. Story 26. I worked in morning radio, and I was also an accomplished bowler. One day I mentioned a high score I had, and a listener called in to challenge me. He had just bowled a perfect game the week before. We worked out the details, and since we shared the same first name, I jokingly said the loser had to legally change their name for 1 year to whatever the winner chose. We even had an attorney ready to donate the time for the paperwork. He refused to agree to those terms. He was up for anything, just not the legal name change. So we settled on a new bet. The loser would get a tattoo of the winner's choosing. I thought my idea was better, but I digress. The challenge was set. One game the next day, with the tattoo on the line. Our studio was next to a bowling alley, so we arranged it so that we started in the studio during the first hour of the show, bowled in the second hour, and got the tattoo in the third hour. I had designed my tattoo and given it to an artist who made a stencil so she could tattoo quickly and make it radio-friendly. I threw the first 9 strikes in a row. He missed a spare in the first frame, and I didn't even finish the game. I would have ended up somewhere between a 269 and a perfect game. He couldn't score higher than 200. So, about 10 minutes after I had embarrassed him on live radio, we went and got the tattoo. The design was me riding Falcor. I had photoshopped myself in the Atreyu pose onto the actual movie poster, and the artist made a perfect stencil. The detail was unbelievable. We all had a great laugh, and I only saw this guy one more time in my life. Plot twist. The last I heard, he was in jail for essay, his second conviction. He couldn't legally change his name because he was a registered S-offender. So somewhere, there's a convicted child rapist in prison with a tattoo of me riding Falcor on his bicep. I'm probably the only person in the world with that story. Story 27, I'm telling this story secondhand, so I might get some details wrong, but it's incredible. My stepmom told me a story her mother had shared about someone loosely related to her. Apparently, he came to America from a European country in the late 1800s or early 1900s, leaving his family behind. He was doing very well and prospering in America. Then, he got into a car accident and had to be placed in an iron lung. He later wrote to his family about what had happened, but iron lung didn't translate properly into his native language. His parents thought he meant he was locked in iron bars, assuming he was in prison. They immediately disowned him and never spoke to him again. He kept writing letters, but they would simply put them in a box in the attic and never open them. He had no idea why his family had completely cut him off. Many decades later, a young girl in his family back in his home country found the box in the attic. Curious about her distant cousin she had never known existed, she read the letters. When she came across the one about the iron lung, she finally understood the truth and brought it to the family's attention. They were dumbfounded. Eventually, they managed to get back in touch with him, and after all those years, they were finally reunited. Story 28. I started working at Home Depot around 2005 and was still pretty introverted. I had graduated in 2004 and was struggling to break out of the high school mindset without a set group of friends to spend time with. When I started at Home Depot, a coworker named Nick invited me out drinking. I was only 19 at the time and he was a few years older. We ended up becoming very good friends, though we never really went beyond talking about women. Fast forward a few months and my stepmom's mother dies. It's pretty bleak, and I really only have my family to talk to, which isn't the same at all. I'm struggling, and my buddy Nick is drifting away too. The day of the funeral comes. Toward the end, I walk up to say my final goodbyes, look over, and see Nick staring at me, completely stunned. We high-five, hug, and realize he's my stepmom's nephew. We had both been pulling back because we didn't have anyone outside our families to bring the real stuff to. We've been best friends ever since. Story 29. My friend told me this one. Her best friend was dating a guy, and they were both pretty sure they had found the one in each other. He was ready to propose and was already looking at rings. They decided to have a 3 score, and he chose his ex-girlfriend as the 3rd. At that point, any guy with even a shred of common sense should know it could end badly. Here's the twist. The girlfriend enjoyed it a little too much and ended up breaking up with him to date his ex-girlfriend. Story 30. I played EverQuest about 10 years ago and joined a guild. There was this dreamy high elf cleric who was always online at the same time as me. Who am I kidding? Everyone played all day on EverQuest. Anyway, we always played together. Sometimes out killing things, sometimes just sitting around in the city talking. Over the course of 6 months, this woman became my reason for logging on. We eventually got married in-game, which her real-life husband, who also played the game, didn't think was very funny. We became very close, and she shared many details about her personal life and her husband. It felt like I was on the shotgun end of an affair, but I didn't know any better. Talking to her felt amazing. My head was in the clouds. Anytime she signed on, my mood improved, and I looked forward to it every day. Eventually, she sent me pictures of herself. She was a pretty 27-year-old blonde, a 1 on the binary scale, the only honest rating system. She asked for pictures in return, but I said no. It would be weird for a 12-year-old boy to send pictures of himself over the internet. I don't think she expected that, and I don't think I ever saw her again. Story 31. My ex-girlfriend's mom was in hospice care, dying of cancer, when she told her son, my ex's brother, that the man she had been married to, the man who had raised him his entire life, was not his biological father. This was news to everyone involved and was later confirmed through testing. Without going into details, the man who raised my ex's brother was not the most attentive father, nor particularly warm or kind. They had a fairly typical broken home story. He drank a bit, they divorced, and the kid was a major troublemaker. The final twist came shortly after their mom passed. The non-biological dad took the kid hunting and told him that he didn't care about biology. He was his son, and nothing and no one could take that away from him. Coming from that man, it was huge and completely unexpected. They became extremely close after that, and last I heard, they still visit each other several times a week. Story 32. Sometime last year, I got a friend request on Facebook from a girl I didn't know. We had some friends in common, and her profile said she had gone to the same university and was in the same program just a few years before me. I figured we must have met at a party or something, so I accepted the request. Fast forward to July. I moved to a new city for a new job, and on my first day, bam, there was the girl who had added me on Facebook. We ended up dating for a few months. It turned out she had added me because one of our bosses has literally the exact same name as me, and she thought she was adding him on Facebook. I've always thought it was a really bizarre situation. Story 33. I was pretty excited to open an email from a secret admirer during my senior year of high school. Every day for almost 2 weeks, I'd receive a new note listing what she thought were my best qualities, saying she was too shy to admit her feelings in person, and promising to finally reveal herself at the big dance coming up that Friday. The emails became more and more revealing as the week went on, finally culminating in a clue about her identity. These are the only species besides humans that do it for pleasure. I totally thought I was getting laid with a clue like that. I was a heavier set lineman on the football team and kind of a class clown, which meant that despite my lack of confidence, I was always in with the popular crowd. So, as we pre-gamed for the dance, I told a few of my friends to be on the lookout for something dolphin related. Word spread quickly, and by the time we arrived, I had a huge group trying to help me solve the mystery. A teammate of mine discovered as the night went on that Adrian, a cute girl I sat next to in social class, had a temporary dolphin tattoo on her left shoulder. After some prodding by my friends, I went over to her and the group of girls she was with. A slow song started, and I sheepishly asked for a dance. With the entire school watching the climax of my 2-week-long mystery, she leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "You're an a-hole sometimes," promptly followed by a slap across the face. I'd never felt that level of confusion and embarrassment. She had orchestrated the whole thing because she didn't like my class clown demeanor in social class. I still hate dolphins. Story 34. My wife was pregnant with our 3rd and final planned child. We ended up in the ER because she was miscarrying. The nurse cried, saying the fetus was not viable, so there was nothing to be done. It was horrible. One of the first times I felt completely helpless as an adult. Welp, It turned out the miscarriage symptoms were actually her body making room for twins. The girls are 5 now. We went from losing 1 to gaining 2. Edit. Let me clarify a few things. The couple of previous ultrasounds had only shown a single baby. There was only a single heartbeat. The miscarriage-like symptoms, horrible cramping, pressure, and blood loss were her body preparing for twins. We did not lose a baby. We were told by doctors that we were losing 1 and had accepted it. In the end, we gained 2, but not without another scare. The position of fetus B was dangerous, which could have compromised overall development and made a C-section very risky. We were told for the 2nd time that we would most likely lose a baby. My wife was put on bed rest and went on to carry the twins to full term. The unlikely twin is named Grace. Story 35. Told this before and will again. I was a little goth girl in high school and secretly had a huge crush on an upperclassman who was a wrestler and did cross country. My cousin, who was Miss Socialite, also had a crush on him and hit on him constantly. He and I were complete opposites. We rode the same bus, and I was pretty sure I was invisible to him. One day, his friends started picking on me. He got up from the front of the bus, moved to where his buddies and I were, sat down next to me, threw his arm around me, and they stopped. This pissed off my cousin, as he and I became friends, and he constantly ignored her advances. She later got me expelled by claiming I had a bomb and was going to blow up the school, all because she didn't like that her crush and I were close friends. This ruined every friendship I had, except the one with him. He and I remained friends even after he moved away and became even closer when he moved back. Today, he and I have been together for almost 4 years. We've bought a house and a car, had a daughter, and are working on plans to build our next, probably permanent home. 10 years later, the cousin is still greener than a Granny Smith apple. Story 36. I was transferred to a new division, and within a few months, my new supervisor and I hated each other. She was incompetent, and I spoke up whenever she screwed up. She made my life hell and eventually decided to give me a job she thought would make me quit. I packed up my stuff in a box and asked for help moving to my new desk. She said she didn't have anyone to spare. I was carrying my box and didn't see a spill on the floor, ironically just outside her office. I slipped, fell, and broke my knee. I am now on permanent disability, very legitimately, and received a huge settlement, lifetime health care, and retired early. She was demoted and later fired, partially due to how she handled my case. This all happened a few years ago. Recently, when my husband and I were grocery shopping, I saw her in the store. I didn't want to see her, but my husband caught her eye and gave her a big thumbs up. She looked pissed. Story 37. My grandfather left my grandmother for another man after 35 years of marriage, during which they raised 2 kids, a daughter, my mom, and a slightly mentally disabled son, my drunkle. It messed my grandmother up pretty badly. Fast forward 16 years. My mom dies from liver failure. My kid sister and I are young and broke. Grandmother is old and broke. Grandfather pays for everything. Nobody says anything to him. No thanks, no condolences, nothing. I want to go see him, talk to him, thank him, and see how he's doing. I asked my grandmother where he lived, claiming that he told me he had something important he needed to tell me. Pulled out of thin air, obviously, but my grandmother burst into tears and confessed that my grandfather was not my mom's biological father. She had a whirlwind romance with a traveling con man who left her as soon as he could. My grandfather offered to marry her and raise my mom as his own. Mom never knew. I was stunned. My grandmother was always really judgmental of other people and looked down on anyone else in the exact same situation. She was sobbing at this point, and I snapped at her to stop because blood never really mattered all that much to my sister and me when it came to family, and it shouldn't matter to her either. Anyway, that's how I accidentally found out one of my family's biggest secrets, and promptly didn't care. Neat plot twist, though. Story 38. I'll share a story about my grandma, one of my favorites. As a young woman, she worked at a humble bakery in a small town in Australia. American soldiers were stationed there as they readied for deployment in the Pacific War of World War II. One day, a soldier from New York City came in and tried to order something not on the menu. His accent was very thick, and she, being a Scottish immigrant, could not understand him. She was embarrassed but kept trying to assist him. After a couple of minutes, the soldier became impatient and started cussing and insulting my grandmother, the bakery, and the town. Well, my grandmother, a proud woman of small stature but surprising strength, came around the counter and punched the man hard in the chest. I'm told she broke one of his ribs, though that seems extreme. She definitely knocked him over. Fellow soldiers lifted the stunned man off the ground and back to the base, where they told their commanding officer the story. The officer panicked about ruining relations with the town and pointed to the nearest man. He asked where he was from, Illinois, and hearing no accent sent him back to the bakery to apologize on behalf of the army. The man did a wonderful job and made a good impression. He later returned to that town after the war, married my grandma, and they lived happily ever after. They eventually moved back to the United States, but she refused to ever visit New York City. Story 39. Someone I knew at university was talking to his new girlfriend about the Glastonbury Festival, a huge music festival in the UK with around 150,000 attendees. He went every year, and it turned out she did too, and had been going for years. After a while, they started comparing photos they had taken over the years. My friend pulled out a picture from his first visit to the festival. He was sitting on a fence with his back to a field. There were only 2 other people in the picture, a girl sitting about 20 feet away with her back to him, and her friend who was taking her picture. His girlfriend realized that she had also been there for the first time that year, and pulled out a picture. In it, she was sitting in a field. The only other people in the picture, out of 150,000 attendees, were a guy sitting on a fence with his back to her, and his friend who was taking his picture. Story 40. I was involved in a highly contentious child custody dispute with my wife's ex and his wife over my stepson. My stepson has always had behavioral issues at school, and his biological parents had never been reliable or supportive. After they suffered a house fire and lost their daughters, things only got worse. Following a visit to their home that nearly resulted in my stepson being interrogated by CPS, we decided it was no longer safe to send him there. We ended up in court, with me representing my wife at the hearing. I accused her ex of being violent, negligent, and dangerous, and his wife of being mentally slow, obsessed with essay, and a danger to the child. I alleged that she had spat in my stepson's food, framed him for essaying her baby, and had essentially caused the deaths of her own children in the fire while profiting from it. The judge must have thought we had some valid points because we stayed out of jail, but not enough to keep my stepson away from his father and stepmom. We finally agreed to allow him to move in with his father permanently, as the situation had become too disruptive for our family. So, my stepson moved in with his dad and stepmom, and everything worked out fine. He did well in school, made friends, and joined the band. I started to question my own paranoia, and wondered whether it had all been in my head. Maybe I didn't trust his stepmom just because she didn't like me. Maybe I needed to cut back on watching Law & Order. Less than 6 months after the move, my stepson got sick enough to need a doctor-prescribed course of antibiotics. He was home alone with his stepmom with a 103-degree fever, but she still made him do chores. When he didn't do them to her liking, she withheld both his prescribed antibiotics. She then tried to give him a double-dose meds. By the time his dad came home, his fever had risen to 104 degrees. His dad went ballistic and yelled at her. She called the police and accused him of threatening her. He was jailed for 7 days. Losing both his job and the PhD he was months away from completing. Stepmom then filed for divorce. Since then, Dad told us that stepmom really did spit in stepson's food, and he knew about it. She was assayed by a family member for years without any prosecution, and he showed us the medical records showing that she tried to get stepson framed for hurting her baby. At the first divorce hearing, she accused stepson, dad, and grandpa of assaying her babies. So, yeah, I guess I know crazy when I smell it. Story 41. About 10 years ago in college, a girl I had been friends with since high school said she wanted to take the train up to visit me for the weekend. When she arrived, we went straight to the bar and drank 2 pitchers of beer. We were both very drunk and stumbled back to my dorm room. I was lying on the bed starting to pass out when she came out of the bathroom in just her underwear. It felt strange given our long friendship, but I assumed it was because we were both so intoxicated. Then, unexpectedly, she got into my bed and initiated things. It was a huge what the F moment, but at that point, there wasn't much I could do. After a little while, I got a little close, and she asked, "Do you think we should?" I was like, yes, we should. We ended up doing it, and I literally lasted about 30 seconds. I think I was just completely caught off guard by the whole situation. It was incredibly embarrassing. We both just passed out afterward. The next morning, she said she was hopping on the next train back to school. It was awkward. We lost contact after that, and I ran into her in our hometown at a party about 3 years later. She was there with all her friends, and I kept thinking they were probably laughing at me because she had told them the story. After avoiding each other for a while, she finally came up to me, and we had an awkward conversation about nothing in particular. Finally, she said, "Things got weird after I came to visit you." I replied, "Yeah, about that." But before I could say anything else, she asked, I just have to ask you one thing. Why did you stop? I was confused at first, but then realized she didn't even know I had finished. I said, well, I just thought it would be bad for our friendship. I guess I was right. Biggest bullet dodge of my life. Story 42. For clarity, I live in the US. I once spent about 6 months trying to court, yes, awkwardly, a girl I had had a crush on for the previous few years back in high school. Things seemed to be going well, and then she and her family took a 6-week trip to Vietnam. No big deal. They were just visiting family. When she came back, things resumed, but something felt off. After a few more months of my awkward attempts, I finally asked her what was going on. It turned out she had been dating someone for a few months, from Australia. She had met him briefly in Vietnam and apparently fallen madly in love. But wait, there's more. Eventually, she realized how crazy it was to date a guy she barely knew, who lived literally halfway around the world, was several years older, and who presumably had an alcohol problem. No Australian joke. Every picture I saw of him featured a beer bottle and a black eye. They broke up. A few months later, she got a text from him saying he was still coming to the US to see her. They had planned the trip while still in the middle of a long-distance relationship, and he was going to kill her. By this point, she and I weren't on the best terms, but she still called me because I was one of the few people who knew how deep the rabbit hole went. Eventually, the police and other responsible adults got involved, and everything blew over. At least I think so. She was never harmed, so I assume things are peachy keen. Story 43. It was a plot twist for the staff involved, but the manager was pulling the strings. I worked at a construction company in the office as a project manager. My boss, who ran the entire company, was getting fed up with a few of our field staff. They were talented, but a little too rough around the edges, and they had angered several clients on different jobs. They also leveraged their skills for extra pay at every opportunity. Whenever we were overbooked or understaffed, they would threaten to walk out unless they were paid more. They didn't always work together, but my boss assigned them all to the same project, working out of town, where they were provided lodging and a generous per diem. The first week, they were relatively mild, just hitting the bars pretty heavily from Tuesday to Thursday and showing up hungover every day. By the middle of the second week, they were closing down the bar, had picked up some party friends, and kept the party going back at the motel. It wasn't quite fear and loathing, but the room was destroyed. They were kicked out, and they were still drinking at 5 in the morning. They had to call their wives to get them out of lockup and missed the rest of the week. They were fired for cause. I asked the manager what the hell he was thinking putting them together. He should have seen this coming. His response? Exactly. I've been waiting for a good time to get rid of those jerks. I'm sick of being their babysitter. It had been his plan all along. He didn't know exactly what would happen, but he knew it would be bad enough to justify letting them go. Story 44. Back in May, my family opened a restaurant. We immediately hired my lifelong next-door neighbor and close friend. Let's call him MJ. Everything was pretty shaky because it was the first few months of a restaurant that had almost no business before we moved in. MJ backed us 100%, taking shifts for anyone at any time. He and I basically became attached at the hip because we worked together and still lived next door to each other. My parents treated him like part of the family. They let him hang out even when I wasn't there, and even let him use their car whenever he needed it. Fast forward to November, I picked up the rent money from a house in Philadelphia where I was still paying rent. My check hadn't cleared yet, so I brought the cash home, planning to go back the next day. One thing led to another, and I had to stay home for a few days with the money. When I finally decided to go back, I noticed I was missing $200. Embarrassed, I assumed I had misplaced it, and decided to wait a few days for my check to come in so I could use my paycheck to replace it. The day that happened, my wallet went missing. Once again, I figured I had lost it. I searched for a few days and couldn't find it. Finally, I humbly asked my parents to loan me the amount needed to cover the cash that had been in my wallet so I could go pay rent. The day I finally planned to go pay rent arrived. I checked my bank account while I was at work and $400 were missing. I panicked. I called the bank, got the exact dates, times, and locations of the charges, and canceled the card. Then I called the police, explained what had happened, and they told me to come in to file a report. MJ was working that day too, so I asked if he could stop by the police station with me on the way home, and he agreed. On the drive over, he told me we needed to talk. He admitted he had a serious gambling problem and had gotten into trouble with a bookie. He said he had stolen my card and made the charges, but claimed he didn't know where my wallet was. Then he suggested we should still go to the police station to report my license missing, so I wouldn't get in trouble if I got pulled over. I lost it and started screaming at him. When we got to the station, I told the officers he had confessed and was waiting in the car. They arrested him on the spot. He's being prosecuted by the state, though I'm not sure on what charges. He was also on probation at the time, so he's pretty much done for. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.